Hi, I'm Eric Soriano, Senior Commercial Sales Rep at Hermes Landscaping. I want to talk about something today that's a very important topic called landscape establishment. And landscape establishment is the process of helping plants to establish the first year of life after being transplanted to a landscape. And the Corps of Engineers has a document called Landscape Establishment. It's spec section 320533. So it's a 10-page document that the Corps of Engineers requires on their project. So it's a real issue. The government understands it. And I want to talk a little bit today about why it's important. You might invest $100,000 to $1 million plus on a new landscape. And in the process of installing landscape, we're transplanting trees and shrubs and perennials and grasses. And we want to make sure they get well established the first year, because if they don't, they could become stunted. They could have problems with root systems and things like that. So what I'm going to show you here is why establishment in monitoring is so important. When we transplant a tree, for instance, here's what the root ball. And we transplant it into a tree hole that's somewhat bigger than the root ball. And this tree is, in this case, it's a ball and burlap tree. The only environment it has to live in is this immediate area around the root ball. Until those roots have extended out into the surrounding grade, this tree is very dependent on what happens within this small environment. And if this is not being monitored during establishment, what can happen is this tree can either be too dry or too wet, both of which are not good for the tree. So we've taken this valve key and we've cut the notches into the steel so that when we insert it into the ground next to the tree, and we pull out of the ground, we can see if there's mud in here, or is it dirt, or is it really dry dirt, and we can determine what the moisture level is down here below ground level on that root ball. The first year in a transplanted tree's life, it's going to exist with whatever environment is immediately surrounding the root ball. So if we take this probe and we stick it in next to the tree, we can see what the moisture condition is. And why is this an issue, right? Well, you say, hey, the tree has been planted in an irrigated lawn area. Okay, so that sounds like, well, it's going to be watered, right? Well, the truth is, if you look at an irrigation system, they're designed here in Kansas City to put down 1 inch of water a week. And we do that over 3 or 4 different run periods, right? So here's this irrigation head, it pops up, and it sprays water out, but it's only putting out 1/3 of an inch of water at a time. So that's great for the grass, because the grass is shallow rooted typically, fescue turf. But here's the tree root ball over here, and remember, it needs water down 20 to 30 inches deep, because the root ball is throughout this mass, we call it the ball and burlap root ball. So now we're putting down 1/3 of an inch of water, it's not getting down the bottom there. Now how are we going to know if this tree has moisture down here at the bottom of the root ball, where it needs it to establish? It takes about 20 gallons a week per tree for the first growing season to establish. It's not getting 20 gallons from this little irrigation head, it's putting down 1/3 of an inch at a time. And by the way, by the time this thing runs again, this irrigation head runs again, this water's gone through what they call transvaporation. Transpiration of plants and evaporation through solar and wind and things like that affect the ground moisture. So this tree could sit here and you think you're getting water with irrigation heads, you think you're getting it established, but in fact this root ball could be bone dry. And one of the processes in establishment is coming through with a probe like this, putting it down into the root zone, and withdrawing it and looking at the moisture content. So that's all part of this process that I'm talking about today, called establishment. Now this is just one item that has to be established in a landscape. There's a whole list of things, all the shrubs. So someone needs to walk by and look at the shrubs and say, are they establishing? Are they planted too deep? Are they planted too high? Has the ground sunk? And many times the ground does sink because of lack of compaction by the excavation contractor or by the landscaper. So throughout that first year, someone needs to be out on the landscape inspecting the plant material, the shrubs, the trees, the grasses, even the native grasses or the fescue turf. If we see that the fescue turf is kind of yellow, We know it needs some fertilization perhaps, right? Or someone needs to be adjusting the irrigation system accurately, because when we put them in, we set them for 30 minutes for a rotor zone and 15 minutes for a spray zone, but that oftentimes is too much or too little depending on the characteristics of the soil. Is it a high perk rate soil, or is it full of clay and not perking in? So establishment is a very broad reaching service that has to be performed weekly on a new landscape to make sure that the trees are getting established correctly, not too dry, not too wet. If they're too wet, here's a big problem. So when we put down a new fescue lawn, sod specifically, it takes about 21 days of constant moisture to keep that grass alive and to help it establish. So now we're running that irrigation system up to 3 times a day, okay? So now we're making sure it stays swampy, really wet. Well, that tree over here is saying, hey, I want to have dry periods and wet periods. I want to be really well watered once a week, and then I want to go dry. It's because we don't want to create an anaerobic condition. This tree requires, believe it or not, a tree root system is an aerobic system. It off gases and it takes in gas, okay? It off gases oxygen and intakes CO2 as well as other things, right? So we don't want this tree to be saturated for 21 days. The lawn, the grass, we want it to stay soaking wet for 21 days. So you really can't drown fescue sod if it's not under, while it's not underwater. In the meantime, if this is an evergreen, a spruce, this spruce tree can drown in 21 days. Because evergreens, particularly spruces, do not like wet feet. So now we have a spruce here, and this all goes back to the establishment process. Someone out there walking the site with a horticultural background, inspecting the plants, inspecting the sod, the native grasses, to make sure they're getting established, that they're in a favorable environment and they're happy. Ask me about how fast a tree will go. I'll say it depends on how fast a tree will grow. I'll tell you, it depends on how happy the tree is. In other words, is it getting the right nutrients? Does it have the right sun condition, the right soil condition, and on, right? So that's why establishment is such an important service to purchase for the first year of your landscape.